Welcome back to the Dare to Love podcast. It's your host, Victoria Holloway, and today we are going to be debunking some of Christian stigmas and sayings around mental health and taking medication. So let's get into it. One of the things I do want to get kind of out there so you guys know a little bit more about me and my experience before we jump into debunking some of these things is that while if you've watched any of my content in the past, particularly this past January's episode, or if you've read any of my blogs, you know that I've experienced some complex grief, some complex trauma, and have lost, several people in my life. And so obviously there's a lot of mental health issues that come up when grief is present. But something that I do want to make kind of clear before we jump into a lot of discussion is that I believe I was struggling with depression symptoms years prior to me experiencing the loss that I experienced in 2022 and 2023. It wasn't until those two major things happened, lost my sister, I lost my dad, that I really was able to seek the help that I needed for those conditions, because obviously grief just antagonized that feeling and just made it much worse. But I really was dealing with a lot of depression leading up to that in my early and mid 20s, dealing with, just I would feel things and I didn't know who to talk to about it because there's so much stigma. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, it's almost like I'm speaking to like my younger 20-year-old self, because I didn't have that resource at the time to go to. Even though I was working in vocational ministry at the time, I was very involved in church activities. I didn't have the resources that I needed to be mentally well. And so part of this video is really me being able to talk to younger me and let myself know that it's okay that I experienced what I experienced. So the first stigma that we are going to debunk is that if you're having mental health issues or mental illness of any kind, that there is sin involved, that it's a sin to feel these things, that sin caused these things from happening. We're going to debunk that first. I have a couple notes written down here, so I'm just going to reference those a little bit. But first of all is there are numerous characters in the Bible that mention and experience intense emotions. For example, Elijah in First Kings, he experiences some depression, exhaustion. He even has some suicidal ideation. And we see how God provides food and rest for him as a way to minister to his ailments at the time. We also see in the Psalms are full of depictions of emotion, not just negative emotion, but positive emotions as well. But a lot of the Psalms express deep grief, deep depression, anguish, anxiety. A lot of the Psalms are really pictures of what was taking place in these people's lives at the time. And I think the other obvious one is Job. There's an entire book about his journey through grief and loss and emotion and all of that. And you could say that these people were sinful. You could say that, but that doesn't mean that their sin is what caused these negative emotions. I also think, and I'm not a scholar, this is just my opinion, but to say that a emotion that you're feeling, that's an intense emotion, that's causing you to have physical ailments in your body, to say that that's caused from a sin is deeply insulting to the nature of God. God created us to feel these feelings. He created us to be in. The human race is so intelligent and so well formed, that we have the capacity to feel very intense emotions at any point in time in our life, whether it be negative emotions or positive emotions. And we can feel them as intensely as humanly possible. That's a gift from God, that we have the ability to feel. So to say that it is a sin is an insult, in my opinion, to the one who created us. The second stigma to debunk is just the pray away effect that I think is most prominent in a lot of church culture, is that if you ever are to express that you're experiencing some heavy emotions, the natural response for most people, and only response for most people, is that you should just pray about it. For one, if you're watching this and you're like, yeah, that's what I would tell somebody to do, I just want you to stop and think that if somebody is experiencing suicidal ideation, the likelihood that they've already prayed for God to take this feeling away from them is extremely high. So if they're coming to you for help, and your response is that they should pray about it, you're not helping that person, because the likelihood that they have done the spiritual part is very high. In Proverbs, it talks about seeking wise counsel, and I think that that's what therapy is for me. It's me being able to go and discuss some of these really heavy topics with someone who has no stake in the game, and somebody that's qualified to help me, and it's me seeking wise counsel. So, the pray away effect is just maybe not very realistic. Of course you should pray. Of course, and many of us do. And for me, an example from my story is that, I have grown up in church my entire life. My dad was an ordained minister. I was in church every Sunday for, a significant part of my childhood. And I went to Bible college, and then I worked at a church. And so it's like, I know all of the steps that you're supposed to take spiritually when you're feeling intense feelings, and yet I still felt those intense feelings. And it only progressively got worse when I lost my dad and my sister. And so being able to talk to somebody about seeking wise counsel, I think, is a much more efficient way to help somebody than just telling them that they should pray about it. I also think it speaks to our character on intercession. If you're in a good mental state and that's your first thought to do when somebody says that they're having suicidal ideation or they're having symptoms of depression or anxiety, if your first response is, you should pray about that, I want to challenge you that you should pray about that. You should pray about that for that person. You can do it right then in front of them. You can add it to your prayer list. It could be something that you do in private. It could be something that you do in public with that person. I would just challenge you to be responsible for that aspect of their healing, because I'm not denying that prayer works. Of course, prayer works. It's biblical. We should pray for things, but some people need more help than that, and it comes through intercessory prayer. So I would challenge all of us, if someone's in our life, in our circle, that has come to us with these, with what they're feeling, it's our responsibility to pray for them. The third thing that I want to debunk is that going to therapy or taking medication is a sign of weakness. So part of my therapy journey and finding my therapist that I work with now, it took quite a bit of time and a lot of endurance to find the person that worked for me. Um, I would say it's unfortunate that this is not an uncommon experience, but people that attend therapy regularly more than likely weren't able to find the therapist that worked for them within the first one or two times of going to therapy. For me, it took four before I found my therapist, which I think is pretty good. But that spanned over a course of 5 years. And there was a lot of like, well, I tried it, it didn't work, I'm going to give up moments in my life. When I first sought therapy, it was when I was in college and starting my job at vocational ministry, and I was having a lot of depression like symptoms. And I thought it was stemming from this one thing that was going on in my life. And I reached out to some counselors that were associated with the church that I worked with, and sought some Christian counseling. Um, and I was pretty much blown off the first session. I expressed how I was feeling and what was going on, and was straight up told that from this counselor that they've heard worse stories. And that was super heartbreaking for me at that age. I was having all these symptoms, and to be told that people have it worse, it's like, people do have it worse, I know, but I'm still dealing with this. And so it projected a lot of shame and guilt onto me, that I was bringing something that wasn't a big deal to the surface. It's kind of a long story there, but the issue that I was bringing to that counselor's attention, I ended up revisiting with my therapist, and we were able to solve a lot of internal issues that have affected a lot of decisions that I've made throughout my adult life and a little bit of my teenage years as well, even though I'm not as responsible for those years because I wasn't an adult. I think that those issues could have been fixed a lot earlier if I had a therapist or a counselor that really listened to me and didn't diminish what I was experiencing at the time. Following up with that, I started to see a counselor that I really did enjoy going to. Unfortunately, my sister died right after I started seeing her. I was only seeing her for about 3 months. And genuinely, I kind of lost my marbles when my sister died. So I wasn't making appointments for anything at that point. I wasn't ready to face what I needed to face in therapy. I attended a group therapy with my mom following my dad's death. And at that point, I felt like I was having some PTSD like symptoms. And I even brought it up to my mom that I felt like me and her both were having some PTSD from some of the symptoms that we were complaining about. It was starting to affect us physically. There was a lot of emotional and mental issues there as well that we were having. And still asked to function on a normal day while dealing with all of these PTSD symptoms. And we brought it up to the counselor at the time, and she basically said, which this happens a lot too, and it's no shade to this counselor at all, but that she wasn't qualified to diagnose us. And so we would have to go see somebody else if we wanted a diagnosis. And her solution was really just to pray. And so at that point, I was sort of feeling like frustrated, but also like I was having physical pain in my body from this PTSD. And I knew that medication was probably going to be something that I explored, because you shouldn't be feeling some of the things that I was feeling in my body. For example, and I think I've talked about this before, but like tightness in my chest. I felt like just a heaviness on my chest a lot. My heart would feel like it just tightened up. I don't know how to explain it, but it just would feel like it shriveled up like a raisin in my chest. My heart would beat really fast at random times. I would feel like I was going to pass out because my blood sugar and my blood pressure was just going up and down, up and down. There was so many, little symptoms that I was dealing with, and I still have some of those symptoms. One in particular is I get like cluster headaches. And so I always know if I'm having an anxiety headache because I feel it. It's usually in my eye and it goes all the way back to the back of my head, but it's only like in that section. And it's usually this eye. And that's how I know I'm anxious about something and it's affecting my physical well-being, because I've had them so often. And thankfully, I did find a therapist who had a psychiatrist in their clinic that could help me with medication. Once I sat down and talked, there was the first meeting I had with my new therapist, who I still see today, Lindsay. I told her the symptoms that I was having, and I said, I think I have PTSD. And she said, I think you do too. And I said, do you think you can get me some medication for that because I'm in a lot of pain? And she said, yeah, I think I can do that. So I took a test, so she could be sure, took a little PTSD, like kind of like a assessment, and then got connected with a practitioner that could prescribe me the medication that I needed with my therapist referral. So I say all that to say that took a lot of strength and endurance on my end. And it took me putting my mental health first in a lot of different situations after being told, no, it's not that big of a deal. No, people have it worse. No, I'm not capable of diagnosing you for that. It took a lot of no's for me to get to a place where I found somebody that could validate my feelings. And that takes a lot of strength. It takes a lot of strength to get denied and put down over and over again and still find a way to put you and your mental health first. It takes a lot of strength to be able to do that. To be able to find a therapist that suits you takes a lot of endurance. It takes a lot of trial and error. It's also financially difficult. There's, unfortunately, not a lot of free options out there for people. So there's also the financial strain that it takes on a person to seek counsel and seek therapy. So to be able to be disciplined enough to put yourself first in that area, it takes a lot of strength. Another stigma to debunk is going to be that there's like a testing of your faith that happens when you're experiencing mental health, a mental health crisis of some kind. I don't want to get too much into the theology behind that because I'm sure there's people more educated out there on trials and testings of the Lord. I don't really want to get into that necessarily. What I do want to say though is that there are so many different factors that play into mental health, from our biology, our genetics, our environment. There's chemical factors that play into it. There are a lot more factors that play into our mental health that have nothing to do with our spirituality. I do believe that our spirituality does play a factor as well. But, there's a lot of trauma that can be passed down generationally. And there's a lot of trauma that can be passed down through our genetics. And so there's a lot of biological things to take into account. And so I think that if you're experiencing a mental breakdown of some kind, minor or major, it's not a reflection of your personal weakness or your personal relationship with God, or your higher power. It's truly a misrepresentation of God, because He is near to the brokenhearted. Scripture tells us that He sticks closer than a brother. So if we believe those things about our Creator, and then we also sense that He's testing us and kind of dumping whatever our issues are onto us for us to be tested to see if we are capable of being a good Christian or not. I think it misrepresents his character, and it causes a lot of isolation feeling, which can make your symptoms worse, because you feel like you're in it on your own, when in reality, God is right there in the midst of the storm with you, and he is there to aid and assist you. So I will say the last thing to debunk tonight is going to be that there's this idea around medication. If you take medication for your mental health, it equals that you've lost faith in God's healing. You've lost trust that God's going to be able to heal you. And truly, I think there could be nothing further from the truth than something like that type of statement. We go to the doctor for lots of things, and so going and seeking psychiatrist help or therapy help, counseling of any kind, we're treating this and this the way we would treat the rest of our body when we go to the doctor. Of course, you can make arguments either way. An overuse of medication can be bad, just like overeating is bad, and overindulging on certain things can be bad. But I think if you're genuinely looking for a sense of relief from the symptoms that you're experiencing, there is nothing sinful about any of those actions, and nothing that can be portrayed as a lack of faith or trust in the Lord either. For me, you can use me as an example. So when I was first prescribed my antidepressant and my anti-anxiety medication, I was still attending therapy, and I still attend therapy. So taking an antidepressant didn't magically make everything go away. It didn't completely take away all of the trauma and all of the grief that I was experiencing. What it did do was silence some of those overwhelming emotional thoughts and feelings, and it eased a lot of my physical symptoms. I still was I required myself to attend therapy sessions and to work through my trauma. It's still something that I do on a bi-weekly basis. Go see my therapist and we work through some trauma. There is still work that is being done that is a faith walk. There are still prayers that are prayed by me, by my therapist, by my mom, that are for me and my mental health. The medication that I take allows me to face some of those things and actually get the help that I need for those specific traumas that I've experienced. There's nothing in that that speaks to not having faith in God. In my opinion, the medication that I take is almost like a crutch. You could compare it to this simple comparison here. I broke my leg. I need crutches to walk. That doesn't mean that I'm still not going to go to physical therapy, that I'm still not going to, wrap it in a cast and do what I need to do to take care of my leg, but I'm going to also have these things that are going to help me along this journey, help me walk, which is these crutches. It's the same thing for me with medication. This is something that I take that helps me function so that I can do what I need to do as a daughter, as a boss, as a Christ follower. And I will say that if it, I'm not going to say that it would be impossible, but it would be very difficult for me to sit down in front of this camera and talk about these type of issues and try to help other people that are experiencing trauma and grief the way that I have, if it wasn't for the medication that helped me take care of that. I think my hope that you get out of this video is just to eliminate the guilt and shame around a lot of the Christian stigmas that we're taught growing up. It's okay that you're feeling the way that you're feeling. Um, it's very natural to experience life as deeply as you are at this time. It's also okay for you to seek counsel, wise counsel. It's literally scriptural to seek wise counsel. And it doesn't always mean a person that goes to your church. Sometimes it means an actual therapist or an actual expert in what you're working in. And sometimes that's not somebody that goes to your church or works at your church. And it's okay. I think something that should be celebrated is the strength in people when faced with these challenges, those people that do turn to therapy and wise counsel. There's a lot of strength to be found in that, and you need to celebrate that within yourself, that you are, in spite of everything that you've been through and all of the weight of the mental ailments that you are experiencing, in spite of all of it, your ability to put yourself first through therapy and medication should be celebrated. You know, scripture talks about mental health quite a bit. There's several characters in the Bible that have dealt with it. We talked about a couple at the beginning. And I think it's important to recognize that this is not a new phenomenon. You're not woke because you're experiencing mental illness right now, or having some mental health issues. It's been around for a long time, just hasn't really been talked about. Ergo, why there's so many stigmas around it. And so don't let people fool you into believing that this is like a new thing, that all of a sudden all the kids are depressed now, because it's been around for quite some time. And it goes all the way back to the book of Genesis. So I'm going to put some links in the description below if you are a person or you know a person that could utilize some of these resources for their mental health. They're going to all be linked below for you guys to access. There's a lot of really amazing organizations out there that are built to help people who are experiencing traumas and grief, but also just simple. Sometimes it's good to have a therapist just to talk about simple life choices. It's just good to have that wise counsel, and it doesn't have to be a crisis that causes you to go to therapy. I think it's a good practice to have in your life, to seek wise counsel and to aid yourself as much as you possibly can, so that you can be the best version of yourself that you can be and the best representation of Christ that you can be.